99 undetectable poisons. How to commit murder. If police have your mobile, can they see websites? Is helium traceable in autopsy? These are some of the Google searches Natasha Darcy made before murdering her partner through poison and suffocation. She was driven by greed and hunger for wealth as she manipulated him into handing over his $3.5 million and 1,200-acre estate to her. "Don't forget to change your will," she texted him just 2 years before the premeditated murder. On the 2nd of August 2017, Matthew Dunbar was found by police and paramedics, laying dead in his bed, drugged, and with a bag over his head, which had a pipe that was pumping helium into him. Natasha Darcy and Matthew Dunbar met online in 2014, and their relationship progressed. A year later, Natasha manipulated Matthew into making her the sole beneficiary to his inheritance and will. Natasha claimed to police that Matthew approached her as she was walking in the rain in 2015 and offered her a lift home, which is how they supposedly met. However, the truth is that she, quote-unquote, chased him down online, according to the words of Matthew. She continued to badger Matthew to change his will. These texts sent from Natasha to Matthew read, "Don't forget to change your will," she texted in March 2015. She decided to continue to persist a month later. "Can you promise to do one thing for me this week? Call a solicitor for appointment to sort your will." 6 minutes later, she did not get a response. She texts again. "Okay, your silence says it all." Matthew did what she asked a couple months later in May. He texted her saying, "Rank solicitor and organize will change. I love you so much, beautiful." Matthew was described as extremely generous and selfless. The sheep grazer from Walcha in the New South Wales Northern Tablelands was known to give money and lavish gifts to friends, relatives, previous lovers, and even tradies who worked on his property Pandora. This embarrassed some, while others sought to get him to stop. His generosity might have costed him his life, as he obliviously trusted Natasha with his inheritance. Matthew was a very vulnerable person, whom Natasha took advantage of and manipulated throughout their entire relationship. She had 3 kids, and Matthew helped her raise them for 3 years after they moved onto his property. Around February of 2017, Matthew became increasingly depressed due to Natasha's heinous and cruel comments. She had once asked him if the rafters in the shed were high enough for him to hang himself. That is barbaric, considering she was doing this to her own partner, who she claimed was the most brilliant man in the world.
No, I loved Matty. Matty was the most brilliant man in the world.
And once he was basically sedated in bed, you put the bag over his head and put the helium into the bag to kill him, didn't you?
No, I did not.
And the reason that you did that was because you well and truly knew that you were in line for the will and that you were going to inherit the property.
How could she say these things? A few months later, on June 13th, 2017, Matthew and Natasha had a heated argument over a loan he had given to a previous girlfriend. He hurriedly took a gun from the shed of his farm and sent Natasha a text, threatening to never return. The craziest part is that Natasha did not respond nor react whatsoever. She later texted him asking to bring food home for dinner. Natasha's response to the situation of her own partner threatening to take his life shows how little she cared for him. The Crown prosecutor of this case, Brett Hatfield, claimed it was callous and nasty. Around the time when the arguments began and the relationship was falling apart, Natasha took it upon herself to start researching suicide and murder methods. This includes the several searches mentioned before. She also searched things like poisonous mushrooms, painless suicide methods. After suicide, is house a crime scene? Matthew's threat of suicide laid the groundwork for her plan.
He did tell me he had seriously thought about suicide a number of times.
Yep.
And I thought, well, that's okay. I'm here now.
While these searches were being conducted, Matthew was staying and recovering in a mental health facility in Tamworth. During this time, she also tried to purchase RAM sedatives from the Walcha Veterinary Clinic. Walcha veterinarian Dr. Rachel Gregg felt Darcy's request was strange, so she called Mr. Dunbar to see if he needed the strong sedative. When he told her he didn't, Dr. Gregg was so disturbed that she called the police and filed a statement about Darcy's effort to buy a drug she didn't even need. I was quite concerned. During her testimony before the NSW Supreme Court, she stated, "I couldn't think of any legal reason why she would have requested it. It also raised suspicion considering the fact that with all those animals on Dunbar's farm, they did not own one ram. So why would she need ram sedatives?" Fast forward to April 1st, 2017. Matthew drove Natasha to Supergas Tamworth to purchase high-purity helium for an event she was apparently organizing. Matthew obliviously paid $140 for the helium canister, not knowing it would lead to his demise. Do you think it's a coincidence that Natasha purchased helium the day before Matthew died of helium asphyxiation? Do you think it's not suspicious that Natasha requested high-purity helium and rejected balloon-grade helium? It doesn't sound like she's using the helium for an event, and it doesn't sound like she's using it to blow balloons either. That night, Natasha blends a cocktail of drugs and a NutriBullet to sedate Mr. Dunbar. She then puts a bag over his head and connects it to the helium canister that she purchased. In the early hours of August 2nd, Natasha impersonated Matthew on his phone, sending a message that appeared to be a suicide note. This was sent to a paramedic, and the message read, "Tell police to come to house. I don't want Tosh or kids to find me." Now, let's talk about the legal proceedings and how Natasha Darcy was prosecuted for the murder of Matthew Dunbar. There are several key events that led to her prosecution. Remember the paramedic that showed up to the scene after Matthew's death? His name is Colin Crossman, and he is the ex-husband of Natasha, who she also tried to kill, which is extremely ironic. Imagine almost getting murdered by your wife, then being called to the crime scene of the murder of her next partner. Colin and Natasha began their relationship in 2004 and eventually got married. They appeared to live a normal life until some problems in their relationship naturally began to arise. In 2009, 8 years before murdering Matthew, she tried to kill Colin by striking him with a hammer to the head in his sleep. Dazed and confused, he did not notice who the perpetrator was. A few days later, Natasha sedates him and burns the house down. His last recollection of the event was devouring tacos that she had made for him, unaware that they were spiked with sedatives. He survived, and Natasha was charged with attempted murder. Darcy eventually pleaded guilty to destroying property by fire, but she signed an agreed-upon statement of facts that detailed how she had also belted Mr. Crossman over the head with a hammer 3 days before the house fire. Both violent attacks occurring shortly after she applied for life insurance on Mr. Crossman, seeing as he had a $700,000 life insurance policy. She was incarcerated for at least 9 months. Once she was released, Colin finalized their divorce, which is what led to her to chase down a new man to manipulate and prey on. During Natasha's trial in 2021, Crossman testified against her. Her manipulation tactics are exposed, and the judge and jury see her pattern of premeditation for financial gain. Colin testifying against her and her criminal history were crucial to prosecuting her as the murderer of Matthew Dunbar. The next crucial piece of evidence that was vital in this case was the myriad of suspicious Google searches Natasha made just months before Matthew's death. There were over 56 searches related to helium, suicide, murder, asphyxiation, and more. Natasha even had the audacity to make Google searches related to helium asphyxiation on the day of Matthew's death. The searches made on August 2nd, the day she murdered Matthew, consists of: is helium traceable in autopsy, and toxicological findings in 3 cases of suicidal asphyxiation with helium. So, not only were the internet searches extremely suspicious, but the timeline of these searches perfectly aligned with her premeditated murder. For example, she searched how to use helium and suicide bag the same day that she purchased helium from Bunnings Warehouse in Tamworth. But how were police and detectives able to search Natasha's search history? Well, due to Natasha's criminal record and the suspicious circumstances of the alleged suicide, the police were able to conduct a legal search and seize Natasha's electronics, which is when they found these horrific Google searches. Another instance in her criminal history is, a year after she began seeing Matthew, Natasha was sent to jail in May 2015 for swiping a former boyfriend's credit card and fabricating a falsified assault complaint against him in an attempt to get the charges reduced. It is clear as day that she takes advantage of vulnerable men, and there is an evident pattern of her gaslighting and manipulating these men. Furthermore, through all of this planning and premeditation, Natasha still managed to constantly contradict herself and get caught in a plethora of lies. When being interviewed by Detective Senior Constable Goodwin on the morning of the murder, Natasha was asked a couple questions regarding Matthew's death. At the start of the interview, Miss Darcy describes going into Mr. Dunbar's bedroom to tell him that a fire alarm had gone off in the early hours of August 2nd, 2017. I walked around to his side of the bed and I shook him and said, "Matt," and he didn't answer, so I turned his bedside light on and I could hear the gas, she said. He had the bag over his head and something was holding it. I don't know what, and there was a tube going into the gas bottle. I pulled the bag back off his head. "Are you the beneficiary?" the detective asks. "We've been together for 3 years, but I'm not sure who the beneficiary is," Natasha replied. "Do you know what it's worth?" said the detective. "I had no idea. That was boy stuff," Miss Darcy added with a small grin. This was very contradictory as it was clear Natasha was aware she was the sole beneficiary. It was confirmed to her by Matthew, and this conversation was witnessed by Lance Partridge, Mr. Dunbar's closest friend. Lance told the police this to expose her deceitful tendencies and prove she was lying.
Now, did you have anything to do with Matthew dying?
No, certainly not.
Okay. Did you put the bag on his head?
No, I did not.
Did you carry that cylinder of helium into the bedroom?
No, I said...
Throughout 4 police interviews, she told many lies in relation to matters such as Matthew's mental health, physical health, relationships, financial position, and his ability to run his business. The offender told many lies in an attempt to deceive the investigating police in relation to her knowledge of the contents and effect of Matthew's will, ordering the helium, her purchase of the various sedatives, and her internet history. Greed was her motive. Deception, lies, and manipulation were quickly applied before and after she killed him. Her lies and methods were stupid, clumsy, and ugly, but were sadly successful in achieving Matthew's death. They were not, however, good enough to evade detection, said Justice Lonergan.
The offender was callous, relentless, and heartless in her pursuit to get rid of Matthew.
Natasha was arrested, claiming Matthew committed suicide and that she had just aided. But the falsehood was shattered when her friend revealed that she had received 2 letters from Natasha, bribing her with $20,000 to commit perjury and lie about Matthew's mental state.
Outlining her proposal in a jail letter, she wrote, "I was watching an episode of Frasier when Niles needed him to lie in court and say he didn't know that Niles was in love with Daphne. It got me thinking, if only I could ask somebody to say that Matthew told them he was planning his suicide maybe a few or several days before he passed." Adding, "Once I am found not guilty, which would pretty much be assured if you help me, then I would automatically get the inheritance Matt wanted the children and I to have."
Natasha did not even have this money. She planned on giving it to her friend after inheriting Matthew's money because she idiotically believed she would not be charged with anything and the police would believe it was a suicide. Natasha stated that she got the concept from an episode of Frasier in which the titular character lies for his brother in court. This was the final piece of evidence that led the jury and judge to see Natasha's true colors and come to the conclusion that she was guilty. Natasha, with no remorse or guilt, pled guilty to aiding and abetting Matthew's alleged suicide, but she wasn't fooling anybody. After a 2-month trial and 3 days of deliberation, the jury found Natasha Darcy guilty of murdering Matthew, and the Supreme Court sentenced her to 40 years without possibility of parole until 2047. This was mainly assisted by her suspicious Google searches, letters, criminal history, as well as Colin Crossman testifying against her to expose her deceitful tendencies. I cannot find that the offender is a person of good character given her criminal record, which included sentences of imprisonment in 2009 for hitting her husband Colin Crossman on the head with a hammer whilst he slept, and setting fire to their house, with the admitted aim of obtaining the insurance money, larceny, and multiple counts of dishonesty, obtained property by deception involving the unauthorized use of the credit card of another man with whom the offender was in a domestic relationship, Justice Lonergan said. Justice Lonergan described Matthew Dunbar as kind and generous to a fault. He wanted to share his love and good fortune with a partner who he could provide for, care for, and cherish, Justice Lonergan said. His loss is a significant one for the Walcha community. This all conveys the legal proceedings of the trial and how exactly Natasha Darcy was charged and convicted of murder. Her crime was callous, and she made repeated mistakes through an attempt to murder both Colin and Matthew. I'm very satisfied that Matthew has been avenged and Natasha was arrested for a crime she rightfully committed. Thank you for listening to my podcast. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope this podcast aims to spread awareness for victims around the world.